This artist learnt this shading secret and went from making really terrible drawings to amazing masterpieces that would make even Leonardo da Vinci proud. And that artist, of course, is me. You see, when I first started drawing, there was a secret that I did not know about. I looked at the drawing of the pros and compared them to my own, and I just knew that there was something different. There was something these artists were hiding, the secret to their greatness, if you will. And if I had not found out what that secret was, I would still be creating mediocre pieces of art. So this begs the question, what is that secret? You see, to tell you this secret, I will have to explain to you how I drew my recent drawing and contrast it with one of my old drawings. Take a look at this drawing. Take a good look at it and tell me, what do you see in it that is wrong? Forgive me, that's a silly question because there are so many things that are wrong with this piece of art, and it will take me till the end of the year to explain them all. But let's just isolate the shading of the skin. Now, what about the shading of the skin can you say is wrong? One thing that you can say is that it is rough. And yes, that is true. The shading is rough. I shaded the whole thing in under 2 minutes, so that explains a lot about it being rough. But that's not the main reason this drawing isn't realistic. Because I mean, there are countless other artists who have roughness as their art style, but still, their artworks are outright jaw-dropping. But it wouldn't take a professional to see that this artwork, on the other hand, would not drop anyone's jaw. So if their drawings are rough but still look good, then roughness is not the reason why this drawing looks bad. But if it is not roughness, then what else is the reason for the extreme mediocrity of the shading of this skin? Well, it is the tone. Oh, not that kind of tone. I mean the shading tone. The tone is ridiculously bland. Everything just has one shade of darkness, and this is something that you want to avoid, having your shading be just one bland tone. So rather than do this, the secret is that what you do instead is use gradients to shift from one tone to another. Now you know the secret, gradients. But you see, knowing that it is gradients is one thing, knowing how to use gradients is another. So how do you use gradients? How do you add gradients to your drawing? Well, I'm glad you asked, even though you didn't, because I am going to show you how I added gradients to this my drawing, and how gradients can make all your drawings become gorgeous masterpieces. So I start by shading the base layer. I always give my drawing some form of base layer shading, and now I am using a 2B graphite pencil to shade the base layer. Now I won't be using graphite throughout the drawing, but I find that shading with a graphite pencil at this first stage is tremendously helpful, because you see, we will be using charcoal powder to create the gradients for the rest of the shading, and one thing that charcoal powder can become is unruly. I will not call it uncontrollable because it can be controlled, but charcoal powder is quite difficult to control and tame because it can get dark in areas you don't want to be dark, or the most common issue is that it can spill into areas that are supposed to be highlights, and this is not what we want at the beginning stages of the drawing. We want that order, that control, something that graphite pencil on the other hand is very capable of doing. And you can see me here shading and trying to avoid the highlighted areas with my graphite pencil. By doing this step alone, this step of leaving the highlighted areas to shine, we are already miles ahead of that previous drawing I showed you, which didn't have any tangible highlights. Once that's done, I use my tissue to blend, and we can now move to the charcoal powder stage. I first use my charcoal pencil to lightly shade the dark wrinkles so that they are still visible when we shade over it with charcoal powder. Now I'll put a link in the description to a video where I talk in more detail about how you can shade with charcoal powder, but I'll give you a simple explanation of what I'm doing here. I use my charcoal pencil to first shade on a scrap piece of paper. This will now produce nice and soft charcoal dust, or as I like to call it, charcoal powder. I then use my brush to touch this charcoal powder, and now we have a charcoal brush. So we use this charcoal brush to shade the forehead. Shading with charcoal powder will help us combat the first problem we had with this drawing, roughness, because charcoal powder can get very smooth. And if you use a large brush for shading large areas like this forehead, you will even get smoother results. But what about the other problem we had with this drawing? The bland tone. Well, we are also fixing that, because as you can see, I am already making the left part of the forehead darker than the right part. And we also have the highlights on the right part. And one thing that now also makes all this come together is gradients, because you will notice that we have darker tones on the left and highlights on the right, but they don't just sit in their different blocks of darkness. Rather, they blend well together. They blend seamlessly, something that gradients allows us to achieve. And even when the drawing progresses and I start to shade the left part darker with my charcoal pencil, I still make sure that they blend together. The dark tone on the left blends seamlessly with the midtones in the middle, and the midtones in turn blend seamlessly with the highlights on the right. And this is what we call gradient, making sure that every tone that you shade is blending into another tone. In fact, you need to make them blend so well that you can't tell where one tone starts and the other ends. You will see this recurring theme throughout any drawing of any pro artist. There is always gradient. Granted, there are different types of gradients. Like for example, there are soft gradients where the blending of the tones happens very gradually. This makes the object appear rounder. And then there are sharp gradients where the blending of the tones are more abrupt, like you can see in the bridge of the nose. But there is a difference between shading something like this and shading something like this. One has gradient and the other does not. So don't use sharp gradients as an excuse for not blending your tones together, because even in sharp gradients, there are still some blending and fading between the tones. So no matter what you draw, eyes, nose, lips, skin, eyelids, anything really, always make sure that you have gradients in your tones. This is one secret that most artists would not tell you, but I have, and you're welcome. But wait, this is not the only secret I have to reveal. Check out the video that appears on the screen now to learn of another way that you can make your drawings insanely realistic. Watch that. Yes, that. And I'll see you in the next one.